Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video and myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, second one thereof for the 22nd of November 2024, and I will be covering a number of different topics, including these missiles that have been used in Dnipro over the last couple of days, two of them now it appears. Although there's a bit of discussion around that, and also going on to talk about a range of things such as women in the armed forces. But we're going to start with military aid and go to Germany, where unfortunately public opposition, there is public opposition in Germany, it appears, to the delivery of Taurus or further weaponry to Ukraine. Public opposition in Germany illustrates the political challenges facing Western military support for Ukraine, even as the war enters a critical phase that demands advanced weaponry. So Euromaidan Press talks about this in an article. Poll shows more than 60% of Germans against providing Ukraine with Taurus. I think that is a real issue there. According to a poll conducted for the ARD TV channel, the overwhelming majority of German citizens are against providing Ukraine with Taurus cruise missiles with a range of up to 500 kilometers. Respondents were asked whether Germany should supply Ukraine with Taurus cruise missiles that can be used against targets at long distances. 61% of respondents were opposed. Almost a third of Germans instead support the decision to provide Ukraine with Taurus. At the same time, 27% of respondents also support the use of missiles for strikes on Russian territory, and 3% support deliveries without such authorization. The greatest opposition to the delivery of Taurus to Ukraine is in the east of Germany, so that's your AFD kind of area. 76%, while in the west of the country it's 56%. Also in the west there are noticeably more supporters of such assistance than in the east. That's a real kick in the teeth for those who are looking to Germany to supply Ukraine with Taurus missiles. The CDU has been talking about that. We've had the FDP possibly on board with that. But if they start looking at public polling that does not support the provision of these missiles, then that might count against the provision. So, yeah, that's certainly not the data I like to see. Right, German aid to Ukraine says, according to Business Insider, Ukraine has requested almost 1.1 billion euros in drone deliveries from Germany just for 2025. These are likely to include 812 Vector EVTOL drones worth 153 million euros, which the Ukrainian MBT had already requested months ago. Due to the very tight budget situation, only a fraction of Ukraine's needs are currently being financed. Just 4 billion euros have been earmarked in the draft budget for assistance to Ukraine in 2025, while military aid is already expected to total 4.15 billion euros. The current plan is to finance the difference through reimbursements of the EPF, that's the European Peace Facility. According to Business Insider, drone deliveries worth just 88 million euros are planned for 2025, which accounts for just 8% of Ukraine's total needs requested from Germany alone. Without additional funds, it will be very difficult to finance Ukraine's further needs. It therefore remains to be seen how the situation will develop in the coming months. Now, Sweden has backed Ukraine's drone production using the Danish model. So that's investing from Sweden into Ukraine, into their defense industry. Sweden commits to financing Ukrainian long-range drone production, supporting defense industry and military technological development. So good news there. 12 European countries and Ukraine have established a new defence cooperation format. The Northern Group Ukraine format includes Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Iceland and the Baltic countries, as well as the UK, Germany, Netherlands and Poland, as I said yesterday. I'm really interested to see where this will go. According to the new format of support, these countries will fund Ukrainian military production by Ukrainian companies. But I'm also wondering whether there is this movement of countries within Europe, within Northern Europe, the Baltics, Poland, UK, maybe Germany and France, that sort of Weimar Triangle plus UK and the Baltics and Nordic countries, whether you'll get this kind of much stronger political support for Ukraine and almost like another version of either the EU or NATO, or some kind of hybrid. I don't know. Or maybe it's just some kind of larger capability coalition. I don't know. There seems to be factions getting together, like-minded countries who are really worried about Russia's rise to prominence in geopolitics, although some might say that they are teetering on the edge of self-destruction, but I guess that remains to be seen. Now, yesterday I talked to you about this £500 million saving that John Healey, the UK Secretary of Defence, talked about with regard to scrapping certain weapons or certain ships, helicopters, etc. And this has been seen as very controversial. Some people within defence circles have been very critical of this, the timing of it, although there is also the same sort of people recognising that this has always been on the cards. In fact, I think some of these entities being scrapped were signposted before the new Labour government came in. So I'm fairly sure those two assault ships were mentioned beforehand, because I'm fairly sure I reported that. Anyway, the UK considers repurposing retired military equipment for Ukraine. So exactly what was asked on the threads yesterday when I did mention this seems to be happening. And I wonder whether this is a way of ticking two boxes, and could well be a little bit more clever than some critics were suggesting. So this is, like I've explained to you before, you've got a finite amount of money. You need to support Ukraine for your own national security and global stability and economic stability. You also need to invest in your own armed forces, and then you also need to spend money on all of the rest of running a country. So you've got this pot of money, and in the UK's case, it's like there's a £22 billion black hole. You're like, okay, so previous government has left us in a really tricky situation. We've made all these pledges on our manifesto, but we recognised it was going to be financially tough, so we were quite conservative with that. But we still need money, and we need economic growth. And we're also being told that Brexit is affecting our economic prospects really badly. And this is actually starting to be much more openly discussed, by the way. So I know people have been afraid to do this, especially with the run up to election. But now there are more and more people. I was just listening to different radio programs today where there were two shows on LBC that were very openly saying, right, the farmers are screwed because of inheritance tax issues and blah, blah, blah. I won't go into details. But the farmers voted 60% for Brexit, and actually Brexit is part of the reason why farmers are screwed. And so there's this public discussion that is now becoming a bit more acceptable that actually Brexit is economically harming the UK. Anyway, I don't want to go down that road particularly, but we've got this understanding that, right, we are financially in trouble going forward when growth is at the centre of our budget. And if we're going to struggle to grow, what do we do with things like our own armed forces and them needing way more funding than we've got? Is it worth spending all this money on stuff that's a bit aged and is actually ill thought through in terms of, say, for example, these drones, watchkeeper drones, are the wrong kind of drones that we need? And we also need to support Ukraine. So I'm wondering whether actually this was just joining those dots together, saying that we need to support Ukraine. We don't really need to be spending money on this. What we can do is get rid of these things, but actually give them to Ukraine, and then blah, blah, blah. And you're moving money around and trying to work out how it happens. And I think that's what could be happening here. So Defence Secretary John Healey revealed in Parliament that the UK is exploring options to send decommissioned assets like HMS Northumberland, which is one of these assault ships, and watchkeeper drones to Ukraine. So let's have a look at this. So UK Defence Journal. The UK government is exploring the possibility of repurposing decommissioned military equipment for use by Ukraine, according to John Healey. Responding to questions, Defence Committee Chair Tanmanjeet Singh Desi, Healey stated that no final decisions have yet been made regarding the retired assets. Addressing the Commons, Healey emphasised that the recent retirement of ageing platforms, including HMS Northumberland and the watchkeeper drones, was necessary to modernise the UK's armed forces. Quote, the decisions I've taken help us get a grip of the MOD budget now and create greater scope for better implement the strategic defence review when it reports. So we've also got going on at the same time a strategic defence review that's going to be looking at things like what drones do we need, what's what's the nature of modern warfare, what can we learn from Ukraine, what do our armed forces need to be able to do, rather than plugging away at these old ideas of what warfare is. And this is why I talked about yesterday, that there's this idea of like avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. Well, we ploughed all this money into this, so we've got to keep going. Like Watchkeeper drones, we got 46 of these. Well, we've only had them 6 years. We might as keep plowing money into keeping them active. No, right, they're the wrong drones for what's going on now. Plowing money into them now is kind of pointless. Let's get rid of them, give them to Ukraine, and then get something, learn from Ukraine as to what we really need. Ukraine can still use these, are still useful, but actually for modern warfare, we need this kind of drone really, etc., etc. So Desi welcomed the announcement of overdue reforms, but questioned the potential for transferring decommissioned equipment to allies or Ukraine. Quote, first, will the unrequired kit be either sold to allies or given to Ukraine? Secondly, how will our people be reskilled and retrained so that there are no job losses, he asked. Healy assured Parliament that personnel would be retrained or redeployed with no job losses expected. On the future of the retired equipment, he said, quote, further decisions about what to do with the decommissioned equipment have not yet been made, but when I make those decisions, I will ensure that I inform my Honourable Friends Committee. He also took the opportunity to reiterate the government's commitment to addressing long-standing financial pressures in defence, noting that difficult decisions were required to ensure that the armed forces remain ready for future challenges. So it's kind of vague, but hopefully some of those things might end up in Ukraine. However, there are some issues in the UK. British military gear has been sold to Russia via an influencer's firm. So this is coming from the Daily Wrap. British-made military equipment valued at over £1.6 million was sent to Russia via the company of an Instagram influencer, according to the BBC, which accessed customs documents identifying the entities involved in the export of this equipment. The company through which British camera lenses are being exported is registered in Kyrgyzstan. Documentation indicates that it belongs to Valeria Begashina, an influencer promoting swimwear, among other things, on Instagram. The British manufacturer of the equipment exported to Russia, Beck Optronic Solutions, supplied components for Challenger 2 tanks and F-35 fighters. When asked about this transaction by the BBC, the company assured that it did not act against the sanctions imposed on Russia and was unaware of these shipments, adding that the customs documents could have been forged. A British broadcaster's investigation revealed no evidence of that Beck Optronic Solutions knowingly supports the Russian military industry. The 25-year-old Begashina is a Kazakh citizen living in Belarus. Her social media suggests she leads a lavish lifestyle. So the equipment for tanks and missiles. Let's go into this a little bit more. According to Belarusian documents, Begashina is a founder and director of Rama Group LLC, established in 2023 and registered in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan. An investigation by British journalists revealed the Rama Group delivered 2 out of 6 shipments of high-quality optical devices used for missiles, tanks and fighters to Moscow. The remaining shipments were managed by Shishan LLC, also registered in Kyrgyzstan. The total value of all exported equipment was £1.7 million. Rama Group and Shishan LLC are registered in Bishkek to the same address, so on and so forth. I've talked about this before, about how difficult it is to, if you are making widgets, or lenses in this case, and you're sending it to this person, sending it to that person, then that goes abroad to there, and that goes to Kyrgyzstan, and then from Kyrgyzstan it goes to Belarus, or Kyrgyzstan goes to Russia, or whatever. It's very difficult as a manufacturer to know that that's taking place. You just want to make stuff and sell as many of them as you possibly can. So you've got the desire for profits is going to be clouding most other judgments, unfortunately, because that's human nature. We are a greedy species in the main, and the profit motive is what underwrites capitalism. And so therefore, that motive is at the heart of decisions that get made, and unfortunately morality plays a very distant second fiddle, and that sucks. How do we do that? Well, how do we solve these issues? It's about, unfortunately, policing sanctions really, really carefully, about investigative journalism playing a really important part. That's why I talk about the importance of mainstream media. We should not slag off mainstream media ad infinitum. It plays such an important role in holding people to account. And that's really good stuff being done there to show that this is happening, and then hopefully the British powers that be can get involved and stop this from happening. This is a sort of process that takes place in every country, US, all European countries. There are only a very few. If you see, was it Robin Collins and all his graphs? Generally, like every European country is spiking in their exports to Kyrgyzstan and such places. It's only a couple, I think Poland and Sweden, as those two are actually doing a pretty good job to stifle that export industry, knowing that it's going to go to Kyrgyzstan. It's going to go eventually, to Russia. The problem here is that corporations are going to go, well, hang on, like if we don't sell these lenses to Kyrgyzstan, then a Chinese company will, and we are going to lose market share. We're going to lose potential profits, and this gives an advantage to another nation's corporation, to one of our competitors. And what someone asked me yesterday, because I think one of the biggest challenges for Russia for Ukraine, going forward, is if the Trump administration comes and lifts sanctions. Someone said yesterday, maybe it won't be too bad, because actually US companies will obviously have the sanctions will be lifted, but you still got UK and you've got EU and you've got Japan and blah, blah, blah. The issue here is that the sanctions work when everyone does them. And as soon as not everyone does them, then actually you will start getting huge resentment. So European companies or UK companies will go, hang on, how can Chinese companies sell to Kyrgyzstan? How can US companies sell to Kyrgyzstan, or even directly to Russia, right? How can they sell directly to Russia and we can't? And what that means is that the corporations and the business entities within sanctioning jurisdiction will be disadvantaged in the global marketplace against entities from countries that aren't sanctioning Russia. And that will then cause these companies to say, well, if we're being sanctioned by the EU, then we're going to move out of the EU and go to the US, where we can then sell to Russia freely, thank you very much, or whatever might happen. It's really, really freaking important that the US maintains its sanctions on Russia. And if that they get lifted, I will be so freaking angry. Anyway, Zelensky here saying, at a meeting with the UK delegation led by Chief of Defence Staff Admiral Tony Radakin, we discussed defence cooperation between Ukraine and the UK, focusing on developing and enhancing the technological capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine. Particular attention was given to Ukraine's current military needs and a continued support from our partners. I'm grateful to the people and government of the United Kingdom for their long-lasting support. Our countries maintain good contacts and strong cooperation. Happy days there. Sweden's Defence Minister Paul Jonsson has said that the Gripen spares package promised to Ukraine covers parts for 14 aircraft. Okay, if you remember, recently there was a support package from Sweden that was very, very interesting, because it was a support package for spare parts for Gripens, even though the Ukrainians aren't using Gripens yet. This then makes you wonder whether they are training on Gripens in secret, and whether they might get introduced sooner rather than later. Or is this just very clever, proactive business dealings or assistance, really, from Sweden? They need to make sure that these, in the event that Gripens are provided to Ukraine, that there is a logistics footprint that is active and functional, and that they don't have, a supply chain that has become somewhat defunct and would need revamping and whatever, and that will take extra time. Make sure all these things are in place so that when they do get Gripens, it's just seamless, etc., etc. That's really cool. Now, what was interesting, why this has come up again, why Gareth Jennings here is talking about it, is that we've heard 14 aircraft. Now, that's a number that we've not heard before. So it's just this vague idea of Gripens. Ooh, interesting. So not sure I've heard a number given before, says Jennings. Restates that F-16s is current priority of the International Fighter Coalition, with Gripens to follow. Of course, you got Mirage 2000 thrown in as well. So you got F-16s, Mirages, but it would be great if Gripens could be seen there soon, and used before they're forced into negotiations and whatnot. That's what frustrates me, is if all this stuff is going to come online at some point, that next year, this 2025 could be a really important year for Ukraine. They could try and wrest back some aerial advantage certainly in places of the front line. If they're forced to negotiations in January and February, then suddenly they'll get all this stuff in like May time or something like that. Yeah, you've got Gripens and F-16s and Mirage. Oh, right. You've got a ceasefire that's forcing you to give all your concede all your territory to Russia. Be deeply frustrating. Right, Ukraine has already the capacity to produce 3,000 cruise missiles next year. It only needs contracts for purchase, according to Forbes. 8 missiles per day. This exceeds the pace of the Russians and Americans. The price of the issue is from $3 billion. Well, I would say that would be money well spent. I've long said this war gets won. I'm now adding like sanctions and the economy into it much more formally. But in terms of militarily, this war is won, or Ukraine prevails at least, with masses of distance munitions, attack drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. If Ukraine can go about hammering Russia's ability to conduct the war, like economically by hitting the hydrocarbons industry, and then goes about hitting all of these air bases and whatnot, then Ukraine are in a strong position at the negotiating table. The 24th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces posted a video showing work of one of their repair depots. Video shows maintenance and repair work being performed primarily on an M113, that's the old APC from America, and many places around the world have given these to Ukraine, but also shows a bit of work on the T-64 and T-72 tanks. There's your M113. I just thought some of these photos or some of these stills from the video are pretty interesting. Showing how important these repair depots are. Many people have said these guys are the unsung heroes of the war in Ukraine. Production of a 2 S-22 Mod 4 Bogdana. These are the self-propelled guns that the Ukrainians use, and a Varta 2 with a Spear unmanned turret and 122mm mortar shells at Ukrainian armored vehicles. That's the name, I presume, of the facility. So, but there's been talk over the last couple of days. I reported yesterday that the Ukrainians have been manufacturing literally millions of mortar bombs and shells themselves. Mortar bombs are a real need for Ukrainians, as of course are ammunition shells. But we often hear the talk about ammunition shells, but actually mortar bombs are super important too. So there you go. Those are Bogdanas there, by the looks of it, being manufactured. I think they can make, is it now 12 a month of those? And here we have, I don't know what's said. M2 A0, Bradley during the final stages of assembly at FMC in 1983. There you go. So not so important for what's going on in Ukraine. This is a Bogdana being assembled there. That's the self-propelled gun. And maintenance depot, the Ukrainian 33rd Mechanized Brigade, showing work being done to a Novator and a Humvee and an M113. So they're working on Western vehicles as well, so they don't get sent back to Poland or to the US, that they have the ability to fix this stuff in Ukraine. God, look at that. Pretty taken apart there. Okay, now we're going to move on to talk about missiles. I just thought that'd be of interest to you. We're going to talk about some missiles here. So a few minutes ago, it says War Translated, actually now a few hours ago, the PUR clarified the information about the strike on Dnipro, stating that it may have been carried out by the KDAR system. So the KDAR system details on the new ballistic missile used by terrorist Russia to strike Dnipro. On November the 21st, the aggressor state Russia launched a strike on the Ukrainian territory using a ballistic missile likely from the KDAR missile system. The missile's flight time from launch in the Astrakhan region to impact in Dnipro was 15 minutes. The missile was equipped with 6 warheads, each containing 6 submunitions. Its speed at the final stage of the trajectory exceeds Mach 11, was the claim there. That's the HUR, not the PUR. I wonder who the PUR was. HUR, which is military intelligence. Russia's new KDAR ballistic missile hit Dnipro, says Ukrainian intelligence. And it gives, all those details, same one there. That's no reports reporting on that. Russians have produced only 2 examples of the KDAR ballistic missiles as of last month, according to Ukraine's intelligence chief Kirill Budanov. The nuclear-capable missile, codename Oreshnik. So Oreshnik is what the Russians are claiming it is called, and KDAR here is what the Ukrainians, I think, calling it, was used without a nuclear warhead as a warning, showing Moscow's recklessness, Budanov added. And Ukraine, so there was another ballistic missile today, but actually that was an Iskander hitting in Dnipro as well. Now, Ukraine plans to initiate talks with partners to counter Russia's new missiles, per sources in the General Staff. There's this term new missile being used quite a bit. And some people are pulling up mainstream media for doing that by saying, actually, it's not a new missile. Particularly, it is one that we've known about, and X, Y, Z. Anyway, quote, these experimental missiles are limited in number but pose a significant threat. Options include obtaining THAAD systems or upgrading Patriot systems. So THAAD is a system that is used to strike missiles that are much higher in the kind of atmosphere, or even sort of out the atmosphere. These have not been needed by Ukraine because Russia has not been using missiles that generally have those trajectories. They either use ones that are fired from planes, or that are fired not from planes but they don't go as high. And as a result, Patriots and SAMPTs have been good enough. But if they start using these other missiles much more frequently, then Ukraine might need some other way of tackling those. Now, ballistic missiles penetration aids. Let's have a little thread. It's long been since we've had a thread talking about weapons in detail. This is VLS Enjoyer giving us the details on ballistic missiles, and particularly nuclear tipped ones. Considering then the focus is often on their destructive powers and on the questions of deterrence or proliferation, so for a change, this thread will dive into the underappreciated world of ballistic penetration aids. Penetration aids, such as decoys and other measures, aim to complicate the opposing side's calculus by adding targets or making the re-entry vehicles, RVs, much harder to detect. Discriminating and destroying the RVs then requires advanced detection means and powerful algorithms. So, for example, if you have one missile coming down, you can detect that and go, we need to blow that missile up. But you have a missile that comes down and it splits into 36 component parts, like we just heard, 6 different kind of sub-munition sets, and then each of those have 6 sub-munitions, and you've got 36 things, and you're like, well, what do we hit? And which one are they all real? Are they all, it could be that actually in those 6 sets of 6, there's only one sub-munition that's actually working, and all the rest are kind of decoys. And so that's how you kind of get around this, the defenses. Anyway, adding pen aids increases the survivability of RVs, but takes up critical weight and space. Trade-offs have to be made. The UK's Cheveline, for instance, cut the RV payload from 3 to 2 and reduced its range to add a large decoy module. So that's your trade-off. Weight, so you can't go as far. The more decoys you put on board, the shorter the range. But then the more chance it has of the actual RV getting through. A first type of pen aid is chaff and aerosols. These can be used to create basic but potentially effective clouds of radar and LWIR reflecting objects, complicating the detection of the RVs. These do not seek to deceive but to block the observation of the RVs. To generate a large amount of targets, the attacker can resort to booster fragmentation. This consists in a planned explosion of the final booster to generate traffic debris. In 1975, the US's signature of fragmented tanks test generated 28 debris out of a Titan II ICBM. Another approach is to use lightweight mylar traffic balloons. Thanks to the vacuum of space, these will retain similar kinematics as those of the dense RVs, serving as rudimentary decoys against low-frequency radar, adding potentially hundreds of targets. In daytime attacks, to avoid discrimination by infrared sensors, the temperature of the decoys can be set to closely match the thermal signature of the RVs. For nighttime attacks, the only source of heat being the Earth's infrared radiation leads to 180K temperature for the balloons. The RV's warhead would give it 187K temperature. To avoid discrimination, small electric heaters can be fitted to the decoys to reach 187K. I presume that's 187 Kelvin. Even at altitudes above 100 kilometers, drag would have a noticeable effect on lightweight balloons, but not on the heavy RVs, allowing precise X-band radar to discriminate them. Adding cold gas thrusters to the decoys or spinning motions would mask this effect. However, capable sensors were eventually able to discriminate against lightweight traffic balloons, and already in 1989, US officials were relatively confident in their ability to negate these simple decoys. Decoys can be further refined by mimicking the appearance of RVs to fool the high-frequency X-band radar waves. Light replica decoys at 2 to 5% of RV's weight aim to replicate key characteristics such as shape, radar cross-section and rotation speeds. In contrast to lightweight inflatable decoys, heavy decoys closely imitate the signature of RVs even within the atmosphere, making discrimination challenging until the last moment at the cost of limited inventory due to their weight and size. Another approach consists of creating a signature diversity rather than trying to replicate the RV's characteristic. Multiple decoys each can have individually unique signatures, making discrimination harder for the opponent. To go even further, anti-simulation aims to conceal the RVs themselves as the decoys, to be brushed aside by the discrimination algorithms. One way to do so can be not to spin the RVs, usually done to increase stealth and precision to imitate a simpler decoy. Another anti-simulation option is deploying radar reflecting balloons while also enveloping the RVs in such balloons. This way, the electronic warfare radars could not discriminate the decoys from the RVs, while technically demanding. The approach was employed by the UK's Cheveline. To enhance the survivability of RVs, measures can be taken to lower their radar cross-section, RCS. To this aim, the warheads can be enclosed in a shroud made of a radar-absorbent material. The shape of the shroud plays a significant role to reduce the RCS of RVs. A cone-shaped shroud with a spherical back, for instance, would significantly reduce its RCS compared to a cone-shaped shroud with a flat back. RCS reduction measures vary in effectiveness depending on the radar's wavelength. Against X-band radars, a cone-shaped shroud with a spherical back would give out a nose on a 0.0001 square meter RCS and a 0.01 to 0.1 square meter RCS for a larger wavelength of most early warning radars. In other words, these things are very precise, and how they think about them and do them, goodness me. Stealth, however, is not the main driver for the design of RVs, as a cone shape aims to minimize time spent in the atmosphere to avoid interception. So it's not so much that these RVs, these kind of warheads, if you like, are as interested in stealth as they are in speed. So, okay, we're not going to be secretive, because to be secretive, you would compromise in this way and that way. We need to just be really bloody fast because, hey, you can see us, but you can't catch us. The thermal signature of RVs can also be reduced. Applying low emissivity materials like gold can reduce the thermal signature by a factor of 20 to over 40, but would only be practical in trajectories that remained in the dark, as gold quickly warms up in the sunlight. A cooled shroud would give more flexibility to the attacker. Enveloping the RVs with liquid nitrogen would cool its temperature to 77K, reducing the thermal signature by a factor of 1,000,000 for an IR sensor operating at 10 μm, compared to its room temperature signature. Finally, active measures such as jammers can be installed in the RVs and decoys to send out false signals in order to drown out the radar return sent by the RVs, or attempt to jam the adversary's radar frequency. That concludes this brief overview of penetration aids for ballistic missiles, a challenging topic to write on considering the scarcity of reliable public sources. This is by no means exhaustive list, omitting some topics such as terminal maneuvers, submunitions, etc. Goodness me. So you can see that the construction of these missiles is very complex, because actually the detection of these missiles is complex. And so you have this arms race, measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure, as you're trying to get around the counter or the countermeasure or whatever, depending on whether you're the defender or the attacker here. And it's just incredibly complex. So now Ukraine have got to think, okay, we've got another missile to contend with, these KDAR missiles, or Oshechnik, or whatever it is. Okay, how do we detect them? How do we know that these aren't decoys, that the signature we're getting back isn't X, Y, and Z, but we need to make sure it's A or B? They're going to have to be thinking a lot about this, and they're going to be pulling on the Americans. And then, of course, the Americans are going, well, I'm not sure how long we can help you. And it's all a bit controversial. But yeah, when we saw the footage coming from yesterday, we saw what looked like these rods coming down in sets of like 4 or 5 or whatever. It might have been 6 sets of 6. What of those were explosive warheads? Were they all just weight simulators? Were they all decoys? It's just shot across the bow. There's lots of information still to come out from that. Now moving on to Russia. Russia supplied air defense missiles to North Korea in exchange for... Now, we've already seen that some animals have been sent from Moscow Zoo to Pyongyang as a kind of thank you for being so cool. Now we're hearing that air defense missiles have been given to North Korea in exchange for sending troops to Russia, according to the Associated Press. And they've also given economic assistance to North Korea and various military technologies, including those needed to help North Korea build a reliable space-based surveillance system. We're also hearing as well that since March 2024, Russia has supplied North Korea with over 1 million barrels of oil, violating UN sanctions, in exchange for weapons and troops to aid its war in Ukraine. 43 tanker trips with tracking systems off were documented. So this will be probably for all the artillery ammunition that the Russians have been provided. Now, remember, Russia sits on the UN Security Council, and it is violating UN sanctions here. I mean, what the hell is the UN going to do about Russia, really? Now, here we have reference to Putin giving a speech on these missiles we've been talking about yesterday on national television. Imagine fully invading and launching 14,000 plus missiles at a country 28 times smaller than yours, and then complaining that 20 missiles were launched back. Should have thought twice about invading Ukraine. Eventually, these Soviet-style nuclear threats get exposed as empty threats. This is really, really important. In fact, I had a bit of a rant on Facebook this morning. Well, not a rant, but a bit of an explainer to people who might be easily swayed by the rhetoric of escalation here. So this is what I wrote. I hope there are no typos. Probably are, because that's what I'm like. A little note on escalation and missiles. Over the course of just over 2.5 years, Russia has sent something like 14,000 missiles into Ukraine, including missiles and drones from Iran and North Korea, not to mention presently using around 12,000 North Korean troops. Russia's own missiles still contain components from all over the world, including very many from the US. They have done this the length and breadth of the entire country, east to west, north to south, against predominantly civilian and energy infrastructure. Ukraine do exactly the same with some 20 missiles, and Russia shouts escalation. This is not escalation. As the saying goes anyway, the defender cannot de-escalate. That is the job of the attacker. An analogy to explain this would be old Doris. I love a bit of Doris, don't I? Old Doris on the other side of the road getting mugged by an aggressive and stronger attacker. The thug breaks her arm and steals a handbag. If Doris gets out some pepper spray and sprays him in the eyes, he has absolutely no right to complain that she is escalating the conflict. Even this does not do justice to the exact situation in Ukraine, whereby Ukraine has not used anything different. In other words, pepper spray is different from like the thug beating around her face with his fist. Ukraine has not used anything different to what Russia already has. Do not be fooled by the whinging of Russia over this. The only thing that needs to be done here is that Russia needs to get the hell out of Ukraine. That's how to de-escalate. So please be armed with these kind of arguments, so that when you see people talking about escalation, you can say, shut up, and this is why you need to or not shut up, because that's, people that can be disabused of these notions need to be done so in a way that they would be receptive to these ideas. Now, just a little bit on the US here. So we've got people like Benny Johnson, who was already found to have been paid by Russian by Tenet Media that was paid directly by Russia to present on YouTube pro-Russian rhetoric. So anyway, he's on Piers Morgan. I don't know why he would platform this absolute dimwit. We are sick and tired of being sold out for endless wars, says Benny Johnson, reacting to Biden seeking to cancel over $4.5 billion of Ukraine's debt. Jake Bro has a brilliant response to this. And this is, again, another bit of ammunition for you when you have these arguments. This guy's an idiot. He wants America to abandon all military support for Ukraine and then let the Russians win and take the entire country. But if Russia takes Ukraine, then who is going to repay the loan to the United States? Russia isn't going to pay any of Ukraine's war debts. He's upset about Biden forgiving a loan before leaving office when he's advocating for that loan being defaulted on anyways once Russia takes the country as he hopes. This is a really good point. Like, if Ukraine don't win or don't prevail in this war, you ain't getting those loans back. So you need to make sure they prevail. And making them prevail is, well, allowing them, I don't know, let's think, $4.5 billion. In other words, like, they need $4.5 billion anyway. Either you give them $4.5 billion extra and then let them repay you for a loan you've already loaned them of $4.5 billion, or you just say, look, I'm going to let you off that loan because if you don't win, we're not getting it anyway. But this kind of understanding is beyond people like Benny Johnson who are just hell-bent on just saying stuff that is completely anti-Ukraine. So thank you, Jake Bro, there. Now, here we got Dan Spion here that I have referred to a number of times. He is saying here, the US should flood, well, he's actually quoting someone else, Ryan O'Leary. The Abrams has its issues. It's the main battle tank that the Americans have provided, predominantly that it is slower and less maneuverable. It also draws far more notice from the enemy. With drones, main battle tanks are now more of a standoff system currently versus the traditional roles. They're harder to hide from drones and than other non-main battle tanks. To be honest, the US should send Brads, Strikers and other infantry fighting vehicles versus throwing a few dozen Abrams to Ukraine. The maintenance on the Abrams is also higher than the EU-type MBTs as well. Let the EU send tanks and the US should flood Ukraine with Bradleys and other IFVs, which is something I've said before. They just need to get, I've said, forget tanks, get the Bradleys that have the same kind of capability to a degree. You've got tow missiles that are pretty good, although you can't fire as many as a tank can fire shells, but you can fit troops in. You've got auto cannon. It's just well more versatile and maneuverable. So Dan here says the US should flood Ukraine with Bradleys. Agreed. We've heard consistently for over a year and a half top reports from its users and seen film of its effectiveness. US send more in the remaining aid package, which is something I've been saying we should be expecting. Now, Chris Cappy's just been to Ukraine. This is him next to a Bradley. M2 Bradley in Kursk direction. I witnessed how the infantrymen live while fighting here. They have a safe house away from the front where they rotate with another vehicle. Their Brad took multiple 30mm, those are autocannons, and FPV drone strikes, and it continues to fight. You can see the electronic warfare device on top. Let's just keep that picture there. You can see the electronic warfare device on the top of the turret to block multiple frequencies, but the soldiers told me Russia is using wired drones that can be I presume that can't be jammed. Their tactic is to drop off infantry at the zero line, then provide support by fire for them. Rotations last for 2 days on the front, then replaced, and you go back to refit. The safe house has Starlink internet access. It's small, but they can cook and sleep there. They said tow launchers aren't useful in this direction like they were in Pokrovsk. That's interesting. I wonder why not. They said that the Bradley is by far the best vehicle that Ukraine has had, and they would way rather have the Bradley instead of a BMP. So those are the old Soviet era infantry fighting vehicles. They said the single thing they need the most is not ammo, but more modern Bradleys, because these are old versions with not as good thermal optics. I counted this particular Bradley had taken at least 3 direct hits from FPVs, and that the outside contact armor prevented. So you've got the explosive reactive armor that I think has been put on them by the Ukrainians has has been really good. It's like composite armor. I thought these blocks were ERA, explosive reactive, but it's not. Okay, sorry. It's like a sandwich of layered armor. I can confirm it works though. That's really good. If main battle tanks are being taken out by FPV drone, what explains the Bradley's survivability? A few reasons, I think. Mainly, number one being that it's way more maneuverable, lighter weight, can get out of a line of fire faster because first drone strike isn't usually fatal. Its 25mm cannon is more versatile against personnel or armor. So really interesting info here from Chris Cappy. And then he talks about, or very briefly, about the Abrams, right? So that's the American main battle tank. American M1 Abrams in Ukraine Kursk direction. I learned a lot about what they like and don't like about it. Air filters in the mud are a real pain, but they love the ammo blowout panels. I would like to see more information from Chris Cappy on this. That's very useful for me. He's done one on Striker. Okay, let's just have a look at this one on the Striker actually. Because these have been provided quite a lot. We've got another 212 on the way from the US. So reunited with my old vehicle, the Striker armor in the Kursk direction. These guys are tough AF. We shared some laughs about the finicky tire pressure system and mutual confidence in its firepower and protection. They had 6 damage from FPV drones and all 6 had no fatalities. They use them to transport full squads to the zero line, drop off, provide fire support and cause casualty evacuation. Even in novel ways as laying down minefields. They run it naked armor because ERA TARs explode if you knock into a tree. They are the 80th Air Assault Brigade. I asked them how it feels to be fighting on Russian soil instead of Ukraine. The Striker commander said the soil is actually no different. It was a little more difficult without knowing the region's routes and getting supplies at first. Great stuff. I love these first-hand bits of information. Right, now we're going to go to US politics. I just want to talk about this very briefly. You've got Pete Hegseth. So what's happened in US politics? You've had Matt Gaetz has pulled out from running for Attorney General because of all the crazy scandals involving sex with a minor and sex trafficking. And what's interesting about that is that he's pulled out on his own. So the people who were going to vote against him, and there would have been quite a few, we know of at least 4 senators that had said a hard no. And so what Trump had done, so Trump actually phoned Matt Gaetz and said, don't go because it will be just bad PR and I don't like to lose, basically. And they would have lost that vote. And it would have caused ruckus within GOP ranks. Why I'm telling you all this is because you now have some senators, at least, who, if they come up for these votes on who should, which nominee should get through, then they don't have to now vote against Gaetz, which means they're likely to be able to vote against someone else. The thought is that there are so many crackpot nominees here, and if you're pro-Republican, I'm trying not to be anti-Republican here. I'm trying to just lay out the theories that are going on here. Now, what they are saying is that you can only get away with really saying no to 1 or 2 people who are nominated, and that means that the majority of these people are going to get through. Even though, in my opinion, would be there are many of these who are completely unfit for purpose. So what some people are saying, well, who's the least likely person to get voted through after Matt Gaetz? Because Matt Gaetz was going to be the one that definitely was not going to get through. So then you're thinking, right, because this is all about Republicans, Democrats are going to en masse not vote for certain ones of these. They'll probably definitely vote for Marco Rubio because he's like the most sensible. But so the question is it going to be Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. or Pete Hegseth? So Tulsi Gabbard is the Director of National Intelligence. RFK Jr. will be Health and Human Services, so like their version of the health services. And the Secretary of Defense is Pete Hegseth. And some people are saying it's probably going to be Pete Hegseth because he has got sexual misconduct allegation that is really quite serious. And that's enough to invalidate him. In fact, you've got sexual misconduct ones, even with Linda McMahon going for the education secretary and the covering up of sexual misconduct that apparently is dogging her nomination. But anyway, that's another story. So here it's going to be Pete Hegseth possibly as being the one most likely not to get through. Now, if he does get through, I just want to talk about women in the armed forces here. So one of the things he wants to do, he's not a fan of women he wants to like get rid of woke generals and anti-woke. He wants to take the army back to the 1990s. You know, okay. But there is arguably not wisdom in trying to stop women in combat roles in the armed forces, and this is something he really seems to want to do. So when you have when you have a leader that has already been credibly accused of sexual assault and is not concerned about the contributions that women can make to national security, it could create bad signals up and down the chain of command. In other words, if he does get through and he's in charge of the Department of Defense and he's got these allegations of sexual assault that are not good. They're not good allegations, not they ever are. But he's also then wanting to get rid of women, then that can cause all sorts of a ruckus within the armed forces. But actually, this is just a pretty poor idea anyway, because the US, as with all other modern countries, are going through a real tough time in recruitment. How do you recruit more people to the armed forces? Well, what you need to do is look outside of just traditionally going to men. Young men of a certain age, right, get in the army. Well, actually, how about women? Can women do a lot of these roles? Can women do combat roles? You need to not be shutting off 50% of your recruitment potential. It's just a kind of needs must. And where we can look to for getting an idea of this is the Israeli Defense Forces that have been doing this for some time. Now, in fact, back in 2022, the IDF expanded combat roles for women, but said most are not cut out for elite units, which I think is interesting. But okay, let's look at the idea that actually they do have females in a number of different roles in the armed forces, including combat roles. A lot of combat roles. It's just saying that the elite forces, it may be a little bit more challenging for them. So we just go to here. The committee estimated there were likely dozens of potential female recruits who meet the physiological thresholds required for certain roles in infantry units, but decided to allow them to serve first only as drivers in order to put their theory to the test. The potential drivers will need to meet the requirements necessary for infantry troops. A panel explaining the relatively modest expansion said it did not think more than a handful of women would meet the tough physiological requirements for other roles in elite combat units, right? So special forces and stuff like that. Don't think that they're going to meet the standards. However, then in 2023, the High Court orders the IDF to explain why not all elite units are open to female soldiers. So I think the jury is open, actually. I think that might have been just a kind of intuition. But actually they're saying, no, you need to prove that that's the case. The question of women serving the IDF combat units has been circulating for decades with a long history of court cases and military pilot programs. In October, the IDF said it would make permanent a company of all-women tank operators following a successful 2-year pilot program. Company in the Caracal Mixed Gender Light Infantry Battalion operates along the Egyptian border, not in wars. This is back in 2023, not in wars or in fighting deep behind enemy lines, so on and so forth. So it's restarted trials with integration of women. Now, why it was really important for the IDF is when Hamas attacked on October the 7th, they had to suddenly mobilize an absolute ton of people and get all their reserves in. And if the IDF hadn't had access to female recruits, that speed at which they could suddenly call up huge amounts of people, the success of that would have been absolutely hammered. There were some people at the time saying part of the reactiveness of the IDF in Israel, and again, don't care about the moral ins and outs of the whole thing, I'm just talking from a pragmatic military point of view, having the access to female soldiers to call up quickly meant that they were really, really very reactive. The army insists that it is allowing more women to serve in combat positions out of practical considerations, not due to a social agenda. So the point is, they're not doing this to be woke. They're doing this because they have to, and because there's no other option. And actually, they arguably is no discernible difference in roles in the achievement of of men and women in these kind of roles, etc., etc., saying it requires all the women power and manpower available to it. Recent years have seen a growing trend of women serving in combat units and in other roles previously held by men, and the IDF beginning to draft women to several elite units for the first time last year. So they are going to elite units. Then there was a really interesting article here. Actually, it was something like, it was not titled this on the Google search. It was something like, explaining the success or something like this. Shooting like a girl, meet the IDF's exceptional female combat soldiers. So you got then a bunch of articles writing about how proficient these soldiers have been, these female soldiers, etc., etc. Point of me saying this is that we are seeing in Ukraine that you can't just expect to mobilize male soldiers. You need females. Practically, you need boots on the ground. And if you just take men of a certain age, you will run out of men of a certain age. So you expand the age brackets, and then you expand the gender situation, or the sex situation, whereby women as well, and actually women can fulfill an awful lot of roles, including combat roles. You can talk about medics, you can talk about logistics, drivers, air defense, mobile air defense units, whatever. Pilots, indeed, someone was saying that they're good in pilot roles because their body frames are often smaller, and that's better for cockpits, and etc., etc. So, there are all sorts of different roles, and combat roles on the front line, it appears that they can be of use as well. But so if you've got an incoming DOD Secretary of Defense saying, I'm going to get rid of women in combat roles, then you're saying to potential female recruits, actually, you're signaling to them, no, you're not good enough, or this or that, and then you're just going to hammer your recruitment. And this is a time when the US Armed Forces need to recruit more people. I just think, there are some potentially silly decisions that can be made if this guy does actually get in, and he's not looking, it's looking pretty dicey for him given his background. But yeah, just thought there's an interesting conversation about women in combat roles, but women in general in the armed forces, and to get away from the idea that this is a decision on DEI or wokeness. No, you need as many people as you can get in a world where people would much prefer sit at home on their PlayStations than go out and fight a war for their country. Please discuss this and write me a 1,000-word essay. And I want that in by next Tuesday at 4 p.m, please. Thank you. And please write it on A4, handwritten. I don't want this plagiarized. I'll put it through a plagiarism checker. Benny Pike can help me with that. Anyway, that's enough from me. A long one today. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.